Hello, everyone. I am Mary Ann Brown, Senior Director of Operations for Forum. Welcome to today's webinar, Marketing and Branding Strategy for Government Contracting, Elevate Your Presence to Win. If you're experiencing any problems during the webinar and you need to contact me, message me in chat. If you have questions for the panelists, please place them in the Q&A box. We're so glad you could join us today for what we know will be a fun and enlightening discussion. So let's kick things off by welcoming the President and CEO of Forum, Scott Robinson.
Thanks so much, Mary Ann. Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing great. I've chosen a Zoom background that is very relaxing, and I hope you enjoy it. Of course, I had to throw a Forum logo on it, but that probably wouldn't exist on the island. But it's so great to see everyone here. And we are here today to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. It is marketing and branding for businesses in government contracting. So I'll spend a minute to tell you a little bit about myself. I've spent 30 years delivering integrated marketing and communication solutions to both public and private sector clients, both as an employee and also in consulting roles for organizations as well. So I'm pretty sure I've done one of everything at this point. I've done a little bit of strategic comms, change comms, executive comms, crisis comms, cause marketing comms, and marketing in those functions as well. Do a lot of event execution, multimedia projects, and I've been blessed to lead a few branding efforts as well, like we did with Forum in 2023. So that's when we rebranded and changed our name from Fed Health IT. So marketing and branding are definitely my passion and definitely what I love to do. So we're really excited about today's agenda and talking a lot more about marketing and branding for government contracting. So today we're going to explore the differences between marketing, branding, and sales, and why you need them all. Don't forget about any one of those things, and why they better be connected to each other as you're working through your marketing and branding plans. And we want to talk about how to position your company brand for success within government contracting. Let's review a little bit about what works best, but also what you may want to stop doing as a business, whether small, medium, or large, as you bring your brand to life. And we'll go over how to change and adapt your branding and marketing programs as your company experiences growth. So from that small to medium phase or that medium to large phase, let's talk about some ways to kind of bolster your marketing and branding efforts in those instances. And we'll offer real life examples of what the government looks for in a contractor. How can you leverage your brand and your marketing program to set yourself up for success on that next big deal that you are indeed going to win because you have superior marketing and branding? Okay, so we're going to talk about all those things today. And joined by me today are two really amazing experts in marketing and branding who are here to share their insights as well. So without further ado, let me welcome Holly Syndor, who is the COO of AWL Strategies. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be here with everyone today.
Awesome. And we have Karine Bailey, and Karine is the VP of Brand Experience at Long Dash. Hello, Karine.
Hi there, everyone. So happy to be here with everyone today.
Excellent, excellent. So I'll let you each tell a little bit more about yourselves and the work that you do. So Holly, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, thank you. Nice to see everyone. I am Holly Syndor, founder and COO of AWL Strategies. We are a marketing, branding, strategic communications, and org change management firm, serving primarily government clients. I think we've got about 8 different agencies that we serve at this point. And, I have spent my career in and around GovCon. I started on the consulting side at American Institutes for Research and got a crash course in government contracting, what the government is looking for, how to put together an RFP, and proposal response, and client management. And then I switched over to the Fed side, and I was at FDA for a number of years, running the real cost smoking prevention ad campaign. And so that was a really fun one. And also in that role, I spent some time as a core So understand kind of the contracting side from both the contractor and government perspective, and can hopefully lend some insights today about what the government might be looking for. And then, switch back to the contractor side. Met my now business partner on a large strategic communications contract at VA. And we decided, there was something really special about blending internal and external communications, and kind of kicked around the idea of starting AWL for a few years before we finally took the leap in 2019. So AWL turns 5 this summer, and really excited to be here with you guys and talking to you today about a subject near and dear to my heart as well, marketing and branding. And I'll
Awesome.
turn it over to you, Karine, so we can keep it moving and get into the meat of what everybody wants to hear about.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Holly. Well, again, so happy to be here with everyone. My name is Karine Bailey. As Scott mentioned at the outset, I lead our brand experience team at Long Dash. Long Dash is a creative consultancy born of journalistic roots. We literally were born of the magazine The Atlantic. And that is, I think, very important to our heritage and DNA, because we take this, kind of investigative rigor approach to helping organizations across public, private, GovCon not being a sector, but public, private sectors, and an emphasis on GovCon, to help everyone, really define a story, define a narrative that can kind of, help you establish your position in the market. And then we do a lot of work back of house, front of house, helping organizations like many of yours, and federal clients, et cetera, to ensure that they are bringing to market really compelling messages that help, move the needle related to their business and organizational goals. So really passionate about the topic of brand and marketing, and started my career more kind of on the traditional ad agency side of the house before moving further into the kind of brand strategy and comm strategy world. But similar to Scott, have kind of touched all aspects of the industry, from brand strategy to marketing, comm strategy to org change, et cetera. And we'll probably dive a little bit more into the importance of, that kind of systems thinking. So makes sense why so many agencies these days are doing more of that front of house, back of house type work. So excited to have a conversation with everyone today.
That's excellent. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really excited about this. So let's hop in. Let's go. We want to talk right off the top about marketing and branding. Obviously, that's what we're here for. But we can't forget about sales. If you forget about sales, the other two are kind of dead in the water. So we got to make sure that we're combining those three forces together. So we'll get started here with Holly. How do you describe the relationship between marketing, branding, and sales? And what does it mean to use each of them most effectively? Can you let us know?
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Sure.
This is one of my favorite topics because each one is distinct, but they all have a place and they all need to work really well together for you to be effective. So the way I look at it in really simple terms is your brand is who you are. Your marketing is how you create demand. And then your sales is how you close those deals and kind of like round out the whole life cycle. So why your brand is so important is that is what differentiates you from anybody else. It's what makes you as a company you. It's what makes you special. It's what makes you recognizable. So really, when you think about it, your brand is kind of how people recognize you, what your reputation is, and it's what you are when you're not in the room. I think is
a
kind
great
of
way
the
to
best
say
way
it.
to think about that.
That's a great way to say it. I always say that brands are like your personality. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you're developing like character traits for yourself and your company. I mean, it could be, what causes you support, or it could be, what services you provide. All of those things just kind of speak to the personality of your organization. So it's a great way to think about it. Thanks, Holly.
Yeah. And equally important, I think, is what you are not, right? You can't be
Yeah.
everything to everyone. So it's really important to define what you are at your core, and kind of embody that in your brand. And I know, there's a lot of different ways to do that we'll get into. But at the kind of heart of it, your brand is who you are. And then your
Definitely.
marketing is how you create demand. So that's where you look at the landscape, and you identify needs, and you kind of show people that they may have a need that you can solve. So people may not always recognize, that they have a pain point, or they may not know that it's something that they can solve. So they've just been living with it. And if
Mhm.
you can play into that and show people, hey, this is something that is painful, but it doesn't have to be, you've created that demand. And that's what marketing is really designed to do. It's to show that you are an expert who knows what people need and can help kind of give them a sense that it's not just a problem, but it's a problem that can be solved.
Mhm.
And then sales is the other side of that coin, and that is how you would solve that problem. So it closes that demand loop, and it's really tied to your unique value. That is what helps you close that deal, solve that pain point, and provide real value for your
Mhm.
customers. So you need both. You need to show them that there's an opportunity to solve a pain point, and then you need to actually tell them how you're going to solve it. And that's how marketing and sales really work together.
Yeah, that's excellent. And they definitely need to be joined at the hip.
Yeah.
100%. So, kind of building on those, that trio relationship of marketing, branding, and sales. What are some ways, Karine, that you can maximize, or these the folks on the line can maximize how they are delivering the right message to the right audience at the right time and through the right channel? And
Yeah.
that is a saying that has just been driven into me in every class, in every way, shape, and form. But it's right message, right audience, right time, and through the right channel. How can folks maximize that as they're thinking about their marketing and branding strategy?
Yeah, completely. Love that question because you're right. It's a maxim that definitely exists in the landscape. I mean, I'm biased, but I do think it begins with brand, similar to what Holly was mentioning, right? You have to stand for something that is authentic, that is differentiated, and that is resonant with audiences. Defining that through your brand gives you a platform to stand on such that you can deliver the right messages in the right ways, etc. So it starts with brand. And then I think as you think about bringing that brand to life through marketing as well as sales, etc., you again have that strong platform to stand on, but then to execute in a way that's consistent. And consistency is very much the name of the game, because if you're not consistent, you're losing audience trust, and then you're losing audience relationships. But to ensure that consistency, we are doing a number of things, right? You are baking the brand into the way that your internal folks think and operate. You want to help them see themselves in the brand so that they can be your best brand ambassadors. And I emphasize that because those people, your brand ambassadors, they are part of the medium, right? They are
Yeah.
the channel through which you're reaching audiences. So that internal kind of change management effort is pretty critical
Mhm.
in bringing the brand to life. And then when we think about more kind of explicit external channels like sales, like marketing, et cetera, again, consistency is key. And there's, I think, a balance between what do audiences want and need from us and where can we reach them, as well as what are we trying to achieve, right? Like in knowing what we're trying to achieve and in knowing what our goals are, that can help us determine, what we need super high touch roundtables, or we need to think more about like a TikTok strategy if we're trying to engage youth and create, behavior change amongst youth in order to, service our Gov clients, et cetera, et cetera. So understanding our goals and our audience needs can help us really figure out what our audience engagement strategy is, and hence, reach audiences in the right ways at the right times. But it is a systems thinking approach. And I think, this work, to be fair, or to be, I think, frank, is it's ongoing, and it requires stamina. It's, not a one and done thing. There's constant learning and iteration that needs to happen. And I would say that sometimes that can feel like a mountain to climb. But I would also say that there's big payoff, right? Like more and more, there is a lot of, I think, knowledge in the industry about the fact that these kinds of brand marketing, sales trifecta efforts really does drive business value. And in fact, there was a study from McKinsey a few years ago that talks about how really strong creative brands that are consistent with their messaging, they are 70% more likely to drive return to shareholders and 74% more likely to drive net enterprise value for an organization. So, these brand marketing sales efforts truly do have very, very tangible results attached to them.
That is great. And I think that definitely speaks to that consistency when you have that, that shareholder return and that above average net enterprise value. It speaks to the consistency that you bring as part of your brand. And I'd like to touch on one thing too, Karine, with the internal kind of education about your brand to everyone and creating that consistency. I think a lot of marketers on here will say it's tough because they're like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'll just use the old logo on this letterhead, or I'll just, it doesn't, this just this one thing that this old message is on. It's like, no, don't do that.
Totally.
Make sure that everybody who works with you understands that we flipped the switch and now we're talking about ourselves this way, and this is how we'd like you to talk about it. And I used to, doing executive communication, would have executives, I'd hear them 10 times and they'd say the same thing 10 times over. And I'm like, gosh, man, shouldn't they be saying something else, or but they shouldn't. Everybody should just be saying the same thing that many times so that people get it. And it's that sense of repetition and like you said, consistency that is really, really key. So that starts internally, and then you will see it flourish from that external perspective too. So that's great.
Completely. And I would say to that end, right, there is a mindset shift that needs to happen by way of training, consistent and repetitive training. And sometimes, organizations need to go so far as to rethink team structure or workflow or things that can better enable their people and teams to live up to the brand promise or, the brand position more broadly. So there's the psychology of it as well as the in practice routine of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So that is awesome. Thanks so much, Karine, for all those valid points. I hope people are taking good notes. So I wanted to now switch gears and take a deeper dive into building out that brand. So we kind of know what it is. We kind of know where we want it to be. But how do we figure out a way for your company to really, really shine? Because obviously there is just so many entities out there that government can look to for products and services. So Holly, I'll kick it back to you and ask, what are some ways that you talk to your clients about the things they should be doing to build out that effective brand and really kind of put that name in lights for people in the government contracting space to see what they're all about and see why they would want to work with that company?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of people think about a brand as like, I slapped a logo on it so people know it's me, right? And there is so much more to it than that.
Yeah.
So I think, we talked a lot at the start of the call about your brand being your identity, your personality. That really has to shine through in the materials that you put out, in the way you talk, your tone, in your visuals that you use, right? So it makes sense to kind of be thoughtful upfront about it and actually take time to build your brand and talk about yourself kind of the way that, or talk about the company the way that you would kind of talk about yourself.
Mhm.
So I like to
Great.
start with kind of a few key questions, right? Like, what is unique about your company? Who are you trying to reach? And why should they care? And if you can answer those questions, you'll be able to kind of put together that story about your brand. Really kind of starting with like, what do you do and what's unique about that? That's kind of the core of your brand. And then, you know, framing that in terms of who you're trying to reach and why they should care helps you tell that story. So it helps you kind of start with your audience in mind. Like Karine said, that's critical. You can't be everything to everyone. So really, what problems are you trying to solve and for whom?
Right.
And why are you the best at that? And then, you know, what visuals help you tell that story, right? What colors speak to the way that you show up with your clients? And then kind of frame that out in a brand guide that you can share internally with everybody on your team so everybody understands these are our values as a company. This is the work we do and why we do it. This is why we are the best at what we do. And we brought all of you in to support that because you have something very special to offer. That's how you kind of start to build some of that internal brand ambassadorship that we were just talking about. And then
That's great.
externally, right?
Mhm.
Like I just said a little earlier, you can't be everything to everyone. So where do you find the folks that you can really help solve a problem for? And then how do you speak their language, but show them your unique solutions? And kind of marry those two in the story that you're telling in your marketing.
That is great. That is so true too, Holly, and it's so important in government contracting to be able to like talk the walk or walk the talk. Like, there's so many acronyms and so many inside baseball things that are part of our industry, but being able to kind of communicate that most effectively while still getting your brand and your messaging across is an art form. It takes time, but it's very, very important. So thanks for touching on that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Scott. Like, I think the simpler you can keep your story,
Mhm.
the better. You want to be memorable,
Yeah.
right? The audiences that you're trying to reach. So, they don't want to read through pages and pages of, contractor speak, and they don't
Right.
want more acronyms. They've got enough
Yeah.
internally. So
Add another U.S. Capitol photo. That'll work.
So
I'm
yeah,
just
so
kidding.
the
No
simpler you
offense.
can keep it, the
No, but yeah,
better.
but you know what I mean. Yeah, it's kind of making yourself stand out. And I think I know you've both worked in that private sector side, and I think you've both done great jobs, both Long Dash and AWL strategies of kind of lending that kind of more broader sense of marketing and branding and being more open to different ideas to the way that both of your companies market. So I think it's really interesting. But I think I would say the marketplace in government contracting is going that way. I think they're taking a lot more cues from businesses of all sizes, all types, to develop these really cool branding and marketing plans. So it's that whole thinking outside the box and and doing it in a little bit differently than maybe it has been done in the past 10, 15 years. So that's a good thing. Excellent. Well, thanks, Holly. And Karine, I know we're going to probably build on this, what we just talked about, but basically those different tools, deliverables, channels, that mix that people are considering, what is the best way to kind of sort through all that clutter? We did see that we're not using TikTok. That might be banned. We did see that in the comments. Thanks, Jeff.
Right.
But no, if we're talking about other types of channels and other types of ways to kind of get that message out there, how do you come up with the right mix? Like how much
Yeah.
of what things should you be doing when, if that makes sense?
Completely. Yeah,
Mhm.
great question. And it does build on some of what we've been chatting about. I think, right, like it starts with research, and I think it starts with a very solid understanding of yourself as an organization, your strengths and goals, as well as a solid understanding of your audiences. What do they want from you? What is useful to them from you specifically, and where are they, right? And then
Mhm.
I think using those kinds of inputs to develop a content and distribution strategy that is holistic, but also, to Holly's point earlier, simple, right? It has
Mhm.
to be scalable and something you can execute on in a continuous way. Otherwise, you start something and you abandon it, a week later. Um, and I think it also has to be something that you iterate upon, right? It's not a one and done solution, as we were mentioning. So maybe you use research to develop your content and distribution strategy, and then you're looking at analytics. You're conducting surveys. Maybe you're conducting qualitative interviews to speak with audiences about what does work for them, and what doesn't work for them, in combination with understanding what is and is not converting for you or effective for you as a business, right?
Right.
Um, I mean, a few examples maybe to get more concrete. We've done some work with FEMA in past, around kind of youth education, around emergency preparedness. And in that case, social, of course, critical, but we realized that kids, there's such social inundation, right? So we wanted to actually reach them in more in-person, high-touch, hands-on ways through, relationships with schools, with youth communities, with faith-based organizations, et cetera. So just one example, right? Like that digital in-person combination was really, really critical for them. Um, we've worked with other gov contractors who are, really trying to get in the ear of the kind of CTO of a gov agency. And for that kind of a play, right, something like a strong LinkedIn presence backed by really differentiated and useful thought leadership content was more the kind of go-to route, right? Like show how differentiated and smart your thinking is. Don't just talk about what you're doing, but really talk about how you're bringing value to the landscape and to gov agencies, and use that as a standing point, if you will, or a jump point, I should say, into meaningful relationships and conversations with ultimately the people you're trying to convert. So I give those as examples, just as two examples of knowing thyself, if you will, and knowing thy audience, if you will, and allowing that to really help you shape your content and distribution strategy. And then again, iterating, being, lean but mighty. And then lastly, of course, never forgetting 508 compliance when you're thinking about execution, right? So
Mhm.
critical when you are a gov contractor looking to serve a Fed agency, both from, execution, design, et cetera, et cetera. So always keeping that in mind.
Yeah, excellent, excellent tips there, Karine. I was just going to add too that the 508 thing is humongous because
Big.
I've seen where people get all the way down the path and they did not think about 508 compliance, and it's
Mhm.
like, we got to redo this, so you don't want to
Absolutely.
be there. So make sure you're paying attention to that. And there was one other thing too. The execution of your brand and keeping it simple.
Mhm.
Sometimes you want every bell and whistle, and it's gotta, like, the logo's gotta have 14 colors and it's gotta fade in and out and do this and that. Remember that anytime you create something that complex, you've got to deliver something that complex all over the place.
Mhm.
So remember, your resources, remember, how you can effectively kind of push something out and make sure it stays at that same level of polish and professionalism across everything you're creating. And you may find yourself keeping it more simple, and elegant and polished. And I've learned that the hard way a couple times too. Where the Van Gogh looks amazing, but it's like, maybe I'll just go with this little scribble, so but that's great. Thanks for those insights. That's awesome. So now we've thought about the messaging, we talked about the tools, and there's this thing called the secret sauce, right? It's those tips and tricks that really help bring your brand to life. and sometimes you stumble upon them in your iterative process. But you start to realize sometimes that you do need to make these changes. And you got to think about your branding and marketing differently based on where you want your company to be. So that's part of your messaging. That's part of your whole, the whole package. But what are those little things, those little secret sauce things that help your company stand out and bring your company to life? And I'll just throw it out to both you, Holly, and Karine, to say, if there's any other anecdotes or stories that you do have around that, because I know that's kind of how it works sometimes.
Yeah. I'll jump in because I think to your point, Scott, about complex versus simple. You don't always think about it up front when you're designing like your logo or your templates, but the more complicated your logo, the more expensive your swag is going to be to print.
That's right.
Every single time, right? So
or like, yeah, we can't put that logo on a t-shirt, or like, those
exactly.
things. Yes.
Exactly. And so, that's something to think about up front. It could be very pretty logo, but like if it's so complicated you can't put it on anything, it's not that helpful. And then, I'm going to keep harping on being simple here. I think when you're designing templates, that really can have a huge impact as you scale and as you kind of bring your brand to your company. It gives consistency. It gives a framework for people to use to keep a consistent look and feel, a consistent approach. And I mean, I'll share an example. We had a template that we designed when we were just, 2 people small. And we had to go back to the drawing board and design a new template as we grew because it was, a little bit clunky to use. And a simple change like that can make it so much easier for everybody in your company to kind of get a feel for the brand and deliver products that really feel like you and authentic to your company, with a lot lower lift. So,
and that's so true, Holly, because the more difficult you make it, the more people will sneak back to the old way.
Yep.
And they'll be like, you know what, this doesn't fit where I want it. It doesn't look the way I want it. The colors don't match. And they will send out the old logo, or they'll send out the old piece.
Yeah.
Because it's force of habit for one, but for two, they may not understand the bigger picture where you have to, be cognizant of all of these different pieces that need to be in unison. So I do agree that simpler is better. And I will say this, and I know it's a plug, but AWL Strategies and Long Dash just have done such a magnificent job of keeping things simple. And you go right, if you look at their web presence, for example, it's just simplicity. It tells you exactly what they do, who they are, what they know. And it's done in a way that it's easy to understand. So those are 2 great examples of keeping things simple and really kind of bringing your brand to life the right way. So that's really cool. And Holly, I wanted to let you kind of jump in if you had something too.
Oh, I can jump in.
Okay.
So I mean, couldn't agree more on the point of special sauce. And I think Holly elaborated really nicely on making sure that special sauce is simple in a way, right? Like stand for one thing, right? Stand for one thing and really be true to that across the business ecosystem. And I think finding your special sauce, I may have mentioned this earlier, but I think it really, I can't harp enough really on the value of research, the merit of research, right? Yep. Study your audiences, study your landscape. Who are the kind of adjacent or competitors in your landscape that you need to be differentiated from? And do a SWOT analysis of your organization. Where are you strong? Where are you weak, or where do you have opportunity to evolve, as we say often? Use those inputs to define that simple yet differentiated and authentic special sauce that you will bring to life. I mean, a nice, I think, more maybe tangible example of what I'm sharing. We just kind of finished a rebrand for a large ServiceNow provider, a kind of federal IT organization. And when they approached us, their brand was all about outcomes. We drive outcomes for government agencies through digital transformation. Great. As we started looking at the landscape, though, what we realized is like everybody's talking about outcomes, driving success, driving digital transformation. Like, why else would a gov agency contract you if not for outcomes? So that was interesting as we looked across the landscape. And as we interviewed actual audience members, which I can't stress the importance of that, right? Don't assume you know what they're thinking. Go talk to them. As we interviewed lots of these, clients, federal agencies, what we learned is that, a CTO, for example, or CIO at a large government agency like the IRS or the VA, they're pretty scared about failure, right? Because this is a very high visibility digital transformation project that impacts the entire organization. And if it does not go well, if this agency is left stuck with technical debt, right, which is very typical for agencies today, the job is on the line. Their job is on the line. There's a really kind of high visibility, high risk, high reward, aspect to this kind of work. And so I think what we realized was like implicit in that research was not just that they want success, but they want to make sure that there's no opportunity for failure, and that this ServiceNow provider coming in is going to support them not just in a one and done digital transformation that leaves them stuck with technical debt, but with a ServiceNow instance that can truly evolve as the agency itself needs to evolve. And that was really the interesting nugget that led to our repositioning efforts and messaging. And what was so exciting about that, right? Like, because we helped the client achieve such clarity of brand and clarity of message, they were able to subsequently pitch themselves in a very concise and compelling way. And a fun anecdote actually coming out of a recent Fed Forum event, a large kind of federal trade show for those of you who are not familiar. They had such a crisp pitch that what they were able to bring to the trade show that they did share with us that it led to like 10-fold pipeline development within a single day. So maybe not every, case study is as successful as that, but I think sometimes they really can be when you're helping an organization get super crisp on its messaging.
That is really, really cool. And it's great to be able to see that. So it means that your message was so clear that everybody's light bulb went off, which
Completely.
is awesome, which is so awesome.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you want. So I know you guys were super psyched about that. Being able to help.
It was a rewarding,
that's
it
amazing.
was pretty happy with the results.
Amazing. Very,
And I
very
think
cool.
that actually answers the question that we got in the chat of how do you sell an old guard GovCon executive team on the power of brand and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's similar to kind of how do you sell your clients on the value that your company brings to them. Why should they trust you to be able to solve their problems? Your executive team is also an audience, right? If you want to sell them on the power of brand and marketing, what is it that they care about? Probably more pipeline. Karine just gave a great example. And then, adding value to the company as a whole. And I think there's a lot of great statistics out there that you can use to back up your story, but it all comes down to kind of a crisp message that gives them a why in their terms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And I think, as Holly and Scott were mentioning earlier, right? Brand is not a logo. Brand is so much more than that. At Long Dash, we really talk a lot about how brand strategy is ultimately business strategy, because you are bringing the brand to life across the business ecosystem. And that does drive sales and pipeline. That does drive business valuation, as I was mentioning from that McKinsey stat earlier in the conversation. I think when you can go to, executives within a client organization and prove that this is going to move the needle for you as a business, it's not just a marketing play, that often can, I think, help you make the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Aaron, thanks for that question. And yes, it gave me flashbacks about trying to convince the old guard to do things a little bit differently. But to your point, Karine, branding and marketing and communications are becoming so much more intertwined with the C-suite nowadays. I actually gave a talk, and this is funny because I went to Towson. It was Towson State University back then. Towson University. I've been coming back each year to speak to their 4-level comms class, and I did some research so I could talk to them intelligently about it. And thank goodness they never saw me in college, so they think I'm intelligent. And so they, there was some work with, I think it might have been with Edelman, but they were talking about how tied at the hip the C-suite is to the chief marketing officer, the chief communications officer, and how important those roles are, and how the other C-level executives don't make a move until they talk to these communications, these marketing people. It's definitely becoming much more integrated as a function. And I think, in the case of Aaron's question, it's making your executive team realize like you're not going to succeed without it. And I know that's easier said than done. I'm not trying to get you fired, but make sure that they understand that this is the way of the world now. And this is the way you need to go, and really how you need to be thinking about your organization. And like you said, Karine, it is no longer just slapping a logo on something. It is so much more. It is so much more. So just take those things into consideration as you're building building things out. I know we spoke on just obviously bringing the brand to life, adapting it to what the government is asking for. Karine, you had such a great anecdote about that. Hollywood, do you have anything to add in that regard? Just what have you seen, and what have you seen government contractors just really, really latch onto in your work, from the perspective of something that somebody's brought to the table in the way of a new brand or a kind of a way of thinking about themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people want authenticity, right? So Karine talked about this at the beginning, but I think it's worth repeating, right? Your brand has to be authentic, and it has to accurately reflect who you are and what you do. And people can tell if it doesn't. And so, when you're marketing to government agencies, it's really important that level of authenticity comes through, because what they're looking for is, it almost seems a little bit opposite, right? They're looking for fresh, innovative ideas, but also safe and proven methods.
Right.
And so it's difficult to kind of bridge that gap of like trying something new while also being proven. But I think, if you can show proven success in areas that matter to them, they'll be more apt to kind of trust that you will be able to deliver, or, at least test out a new and innovative approach. And, maybe it's more of a pilot than a like all eggs in one basket.
Right.
But
right.
I think it's part of how you tell that story of, proof that it can work, with exploring the green fields. And it all goes back to knowing your audience and knowing your customer. What is their appetite for change and innovation? Are they, super cutting edge and, willing to invest in brand new things and test it out? Or are they looking for tried and true, but applied to them? And then your brand has to be authentic to that space. So if you are, the type of company that's really focused on new innovative like pilots, you're probably not going to be the best match for those customers who want like proven, tried and true.
Yeah.
Your staff's not going to be happy working there. You have to make sure that there is that authentic fit.
Mhm.
And that's why it's so important to really define your brand and who you are, so you
Mhm.
know where you fit in the landscape.
Right. And one thing when we discussed just had our debrief like of ourselves, talking about coming on to do this webinar. That was one thing you brought up. I thought that was so interesting, Holly. But you basically were like, it's fresh and new and exciting ways of doing things. So you want to be creative about it, but you also got to be safe about it too, because it's breakthrough innovation, but we're sometimes dealing with risk averse clients that don't necessarily always want that. So where do you want to fall on that spectrum or that continuum? And what makes the most sense for you to kind of bring forth with regard to the services you provide? But we definitely don't want to ask anybody to like stifle creativity. I know we're like, keep it simple, but there's an art to that too,
Yeah.
so it's a good thing. But that was something that I thought was really cool that you brought up. So all right, so I think we're down to our last question. So we want to improve and maintain that brand status as your company grows and as it expands, right? So if you're going from that small to medium, or you got your sights set on going from a small to a medium-sized business, could be in the next 1, 2, 3, 5 years, could be tomorrow. How do you think about what you're doing with your branding and marketing plan as you move up market? So either Holly or Karine, if you want to add some thoughts to that, it'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to jump in. Gosh, this is a challenge for organizations, right? They are running after scale like any normal organization wants to and would, but how do you also maintain brand integrity, which then informs marketing integrity, sales integrity, so on and so forth? A few ideas. I mean, one of them has a lot to do with the way that you hire and train new staff, because again, they are your biggest brand ambassadors. I mean, Apple is a great example of this, right? When you walk into the Apple store, you're at the Genius Bar, those people like live and breathe the brand. That doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of training that goes on in order to ensure that those people can help Apple maintain its status as the company has grown so tremendously over the years. So yeah, thinking about hiring, thinking about talent cultivation, talent training, et cetera, through the lens of brand is pretty critical. And then I think from more of kind of a tactical perspective, right, we think a lot about brand architecture, meaning as you scale, potentially launch new services or products and services. If those products and services are meant to reach slightly different audiences or meet the need of a specific audience in a slightly different way, that is where we start to think about child brand versus, parent brand versus child brand, right? So that we're still allowing the parent brand to be to maintain its integrity, and also allowing the business to scale by virtue of those child brands, which, there's a whole other conversation I could have around
Right.
like house of brand versus branded house, right? Like
Oh
the
yeah.
P&G models of the world versus the FedEx models of the world.
Mhm.
But those are all questions to have, as a business, to understand where you're trying to go, and then you devise your brand architecture strategy based on those goals. So a few ideas there.
Awesome. Holly, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, not to be the typical COO, but like you have to have it baked into your
Yeah.
operations, right?
Agreed.
Like
Mm-hmm.
retire the old stuff that you're not using anymore so you don't confuse people.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that as you scale and you bring on new systems, they fit in with your brand presence, so that your candidate experience is similar to your employee experience, is similar to your customer experience. You want to have that consistency, and strong operations will help get everybody on the same page about everything. So
So true.
we're just going to foot stomp that, in addition to what Karine said.
Excellent.
Good for
Yeah.
you. I
Yeah.
will say one other quick thought is
Cool.
just a reminder as an organization scale, because I'm super passionate about this idea. Don't chase every market trend, right? Like again, as we've been saying, I think over the course of this conversation, clear and consistent is key. And so yes, you can grow as a business without having to chase every market trend, because you inevitably then lose sight of who you are as a business, and that's often the beginning of the end for organizations. So
Excellent. That's really cool. Appreciate it, Karine. Um, all right, so I think we are at the Q&A point, and we are right on time here. So I know we have a few questions in the chat already, and we'll try to run through and answer those. We did touch on your question, Aaron, about selling the old guard GovCom executive team on the power of brand and marketing. So we did touch on that earlier. But we'll go to Adam's question here. Can you talk about the role that public policy plays in the marketing branding that you all are doing? And by you all, I would think that probably means anybody. So how does public policy affect how you talk about your company and what you deliver?
Yeah. I can jump in to start. I think public policy helps kind of shape the landscape in which we're all playing. And it gives you kind of an ability to take a perspective in your marketing and shape your story. So to me, the public policy that's coming down, that's kind of the field you're playing on. And then, your marketing is there to create demand. So that's kind of the rules that you've set that you want to play within
Yeah.
in that landscape. So I think public policy is super important to stay abreast of as it changes, because that changes the way that you tell your story. It might change the audience that you choose to go after, right? So, keeping on top of public policy helps you inform your strategic approach to the marketplace, because it really does define what the marketplace looks like and how it changes.
Right.
And then you're playing within that marketplace to kind of develop your marketing. So, not that your story changes or who you are changes, but the way you position yourself might.
Definitely. That's great. And Karine, did you want to add anything too?
no, I couldn't
Okay.
agree more. I
Yeah, I
mean,
agree.
I think the one thing to think about is, much as we've been emphasizing sales, branding, marketing, all need to kind of be in lockstep with one another. So too do your public policy folks, right? Like everyone needs to understand the goals they're trying to achieve so that public policy teams can go out and try and shift the landscape the way that Holly was mentioning. And then brand marketing sales kind of deploy within that shifting landscape. So but clear goals at the, as a North Star, I think are pretty critical, and goal alignment around those North Star goals.
Great. Excellent. Very, very cool. So I hope that helped answer that question there. There was another question from Rawan. You mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that there are things to avoid when marketing to government entities specifically. Can you please expand on that? And I know we touched on quite a lot of things you shouldn't do. And I think that's what I was definitely referencing when I was talking about the do's and don'ts. So it's things like making, we talked about consistency in brand, making sure that when you change a logo, change it everywhere. Don't have it on one thing and have it different on another. So it's just kind of having that brand consistency in your messaging, in your presentation. Was definitely what I was referring to. But I'll let Holly and Karine jump in as well.
I'm happy to go first this time. Yeah, I mean, I think there's more tactical considerations, like we were mentioning, I think a few moments ago. Be sure that you are being 508 compliant when you are marketing to a government entity, right? So maybe that's kind of one example of that's a do, but also it could be a don't if you're not being 508 compliant. I think that's really critical. And then I think a lot of it goes back to being, very, I think, clear and again, authentic to who you are as an organization and the value that you can bring to a government entity. Do not, I think there's always people talk a lot about the balance between being true to who you are today and also being aspirational, right? Like you want to also be able to talk about what you could theoretically bring to the table for a gov agency. I think that's valid, but I think that you also need to ensure that anything that is aspirational, like a service that is evolving, et cetera, that you want to potentially, pilot with a gov agency, talk about that. Say you're piloting it. Say it's like very core to the strengths of your organization, but we're piloting this new offering, right? So I think just the authenticity and integrity is pretty critical.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you, Karine. And we have one more question here that says, what is your approach to client empathy while pushing your clients to innovate and try new strategies? So that is a great question, because a lot of what we're talking about does relate back to kind of that personal feeling or that emotion, or, those the brand should emote those things, naturally. But what do we think about when we talk about client empathy and having to kind of understand what that is as they innovate and as they change?
I love that question. I'm happy to
Yeah.
jump in, but
Okay.
you go, Holly. I feel like
I'm just gonna steal something you said earlier, which is like know thy client and know thyself, right? You have
Yes,
to
yes.
really understand what it's like to walk in their shoes.
Mhm.
You know, you might have the best possible solution, but if you don't know the like bureaucracy and the red tape that they have to go through to get that approved, and you can't be sympathetic to that, like that is going to make you seem out of touch with how they operate and what is actually feasible. So, you know, yes, push the envelope, but, you know, push it, don't shove them off a cliff.
Right. There's a balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And again, I think that goes back to knowing your client very well, and understanding what makes them tick, and knowing where their pressure points are, and making sure you kind of stay within those guardrails. That's very important. So we have from Freddy's, we have a couple questions on our Q&A chat. So one for Holly. There's two for Holly and two for Karine, and I think we have time for probably one each. So I'm just going to pick one, and then maybe we can get back to you, Fred, on the side here. But what are some unique challenges of marketing in the government contracting space compared to the private sector, and how would you overcome these challenges? How is it different? And I
yeah.
think you both have that experience, which is great.
Yeah. So the government contracting space has a lot more rules and regulations than the private sector. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge is like they have to operate within the FAR, the DFAR, like,
Mm-hmm.
and that thing is long. A lot of them haven't even read the whole thing, nor do they really need to, but they do need to know like the key things where they can't step out of line. Whereas the private sector, if they have budget and a challenge that you can solve, you might just need to get in their supplier portal and like you'll be up and running within a week. The government's got a lot of rules and regulations, rightly so. They came about for a reason, and they also have a very long like sales cycle, right? The lead time to get an RFP out the door is lengthy. So I think the more you can do to kind of simplify that, are there things you can do maybe under the purchase card threshold to just get in there and kind of help prove out? Are there white papers and unsolicited proposals that you can submit that maybe they can use when they have, extra money at the end of the year? Like know your customer, know your audience, know your program shop, and how well do they work with their contracting office to understand what is the best way to help them shape their requirements in a way that you can address it.
Mhm. That makes sense. Absolutely. And like I said, Fred, we'll get to the other question here. I'll make sure I copy these down. But and then for Karine, this will be the last question. I apologize. We're almost out of time. This is gonna be a quick one. So metrics for success when measuring the success of a branding or marketing campaign within government contracting, which metrics do you find most valuable? And how do these metrics influence strategic decisions?
I love that question. I wish I could say it's 1, 2, 3 metrics, right? I think it really does go back to understanding your goals as an organization so that you are thinking about metrics in a way that you're mapping it to business objectives as opposed to, vanity metrics like impressions, right? Impressions can be great, but are they actually moving the needle for your business? And I would say, knowing that a lot of gov contractors are helping federal agencies around, societal change, societal advancement, community outreach, et cetera, it's really like understanding what they're trying to achieve, collaboratively potentially designing metrics with your client so that they are like, yes, we agree, this is what we want to look at as a metric of success, and then continuously going back, weekly, monthly, et cetera, evaluating what is working and what is not, because it's okay to admit what's not working, right? That's an opportunity to have a client conversation and say, let's try this instead, let's iterate in this way instead. I think going back to the empathy question from a few moments ago, that, that's how you show them that you're a true partner. This is not working. Let's try and readjust.
Let's shift.
Yeah.
Makes
And
sense.
go from there. So, yeah.
Excellent. That was very cool. All right. Well, that we are at time. I know we're kind of a little bit over time. And Holly, thanks for typing an answer. I think you're doing that.
I'm starting
for Fred,
to.
but I'm going to copy the questions down too, just so we can have them. We can answer them after the call if necessary. But we hope everyone enjoyed today's session. This was really, really fun. Always, it's something near and dear to all of our hearts here on this call. So thanks so much for being here. Marianne, thanks for helping and making sure everything is running behind the scenes here. And we hope you enjoyed today's session. We hope, and we'd love to hear your feedback. As we mentioned, we will be getting a recording out of the webinar by next Monday to everybody. And in the meantime, if you have any feedback, you can email me at srobinson@govforum.io. Any thoughts, suggestions, questions? Maybe we need to do this again. Maybe we didn't catch everything, but we'll think about that too. So thanks again to everybody for being here, and have a great rest of the week, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.